Welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. I'm Jason Shebilske alongside Kirien Sprecher. Today, we'll discuss this week's action from around the league, including reactions from the Commissioner's Cup Championship. We'll also talk about some of the top options to add on waivers, featuring a newcomer for the Sparks who could have a big impact. And finally, we'll preview the week ahead that features several early slates. And I don't know if you noticed, we have a new look. For a limited time only, you can use the code PURPLE for 25% off any RotoWire subscription. Anyone who knows me knows that I love a good deal, and this is the best discount that you can get on a RotoWire subscription. We have plenty of new and exciting WNBA content coming your way, and a subscription now gets you access to the RotoWire Football Draft Kit for free. And there are plenty of useful features to check out on there, including draft plans, pick suggestions, and insights on the rest of your league. I'm really excited to test out the new features on the revamped app in my fantasy football drafts, and the code PURPLE will get you the best price this fall. During today's show, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and we'll get them answered. If you ask live, we'll get them answered on the show, but we'll also be active in the comments afterward to provide any additional insight. After some speculation that Caitlin Clark could return for Tuesday's Commissioner's Cup Championship, she ultimately remained sidelined. However, that didn't stop the Fever, who took down the Lynx to secure the Commissioner's Cup. Kirien, what stood out to you about this game?
Well, I thought this was going to be a blowout. I think a lot of people thought this was going to be a blowout. Vegas thought it was going to be a blowout. There was a double-digit line here. I made two bets. I bet Aaliyah Boston to record a double-double, and I bet the under on Napheesa Collier's points, rebounds, and assists. And my reasoning for that was Collier's not going to have to play in the fourth quarter because they're going to be up by so much. But it was actually the complete opposite. So I was completely wrong with my reasoning, but somehow still right with both of those bets. Things looked like they were going right in the first quarter for Minnesota. It looked like they were going to blow this thing out, 20-12 first quarter. Great offense, good defense. Fever looked a little out of sorts. But then the Fever just quickly recovered, flipped the switch, and never looked back. The thing that stood out to me the most was Indiana's defense and second unit. I think before that game, we both would have agreed, and everyone who watches the WNBA would have agreed that defense and depth are two of Minnesota's greatest strengths. Obviously, they have the MVP, but those are two of Minnesota's greatest strengths. Minnesota gives up 74.1 points per game. That's the fewest in the league. Every other team gives up at least 77. So those strengths for Minnesota turned out to be huge strengths for Indiana in this matchup. You look at Sydney Colson and Sophie Cunningham. They led the game in plus minus off the bench for the Fever. Colson was plus 19 in 21 minutes, and Cunningham was plus 18 in 26 minutes. Cunningham hit a couple threes, which helped her numbers, and Colson just played really, really great defense. She hardly impacted the box score or the scoring column, but she did everything else. And when she was on the court, the Fever dominated. I think Indiana punked Minnesota during this game, and Minnesota got out to that big lead. They're like, all right, here we go. We're going to cruise to this. And then Indiana said, not so quick. All the credit in the world to Indiana. But I think, when these two teams meet up again, Minnesota is going to be chomping at the bit to have a better performance than they did. Obviously, like I said, a lot of credit to Indiana's defense, but Kayla McBride 1 for 7. Collier struggled from the field. Alana Smith struggled from the field. That's not going to happen multiple games in a row. And when we get a playoff series, hopefully when we get a playoff series between these two teams, that there's a little better shooting from Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I was on my way to a work happy hour with some of our coworkers during the first quarter of the game, but I had tweet notifications on, and I was getting some notifications that the Lynx were emptying their bench. So I looked to see what the score was. It was an 8-point lead, which is certainly the Lynx jumped out to something, but I wonder if they got overconfident. And yeah, I think that just without Caitlin Clark, as we'll kind of talk about a little bit later on the show, it feels like the Fever are starting to find their identity without Caitlin Clark, and certainly she'll be back at some point. But it's good to see the Fever connecting in ways without her, because you never know what will happen over the course of the season, especially now that the season is 44 games. So while it looked like they were really struggling earlier on, it seems like they're at least more competitive now. And I think that they should at least be like a middle of the pack to above average team, even when Caitlin Clark is sidelined.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, that identity, obviously when Clark is on the floor, their identity is offense because she's one of the most prolific offensive players in the league or in the history of the league. But that defensive identity, that's going to help. That winning championships is built. You got to play defense to win championships. So if Indiana can establish a defensive identity without Clark, and then Clark comes back and automatically makes their offense much better, this could be, that could be the Indiana team we thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season for sure.
Yep, absolutely. And we also had several exciting games over the weekend, including the Sky nearly defeating the Lynx in Minnesota on Sunday. Do we think that this could signal a turning point for Chicago, or was it merely a byproduct of the Lynx playing the second half of a back-to-back set?
All right, so full disclosure, I did watch the Commissioner's Cup Championship. I was still in town for that, but full disclosure, I was sitting on a boat in northern Wisconsin with no Wi-Fi for 4 days. So I didn't watch this game live, but I looked at the box score. I saw some highlights. I think it's fair to say that the Sky have turned a corner from bad to maybe decent, but I don't think we can make any, proclamations that they are close to the team that me and you expected them to be, or at least I expected them to be. I expect them to be 500, flirting with playoff spot again. Like we said, like they've kind of turned a corner, but their last 3 wins have come against the Sun and the Sparks twice. So those teams are at the bottom of the standing. So the Sky should win those games. So they got to start winning games that they're not expected to, for me to say, they're back in that 500 middle of the pack tier. But I think that's totally possible. Camila Cardoso is expected back from Mary Cup soon. And Angel Reese is playing like an MVP. I'm not saying she is the MVP, but she's playing like an MVP right now, doing things that no one else has ever done in the history of the league. So if she keeps that up, they get Cardoso back. We'll talk about a couple other players that are trending up for the Sky. I think the Sky could get back to that, that middle of the pack tier, but right now they're just one step up above the Sparks and Sun for me.
Yeah, and Angel Reese, like you said, she's had 5 consecutive games with at least 16 rebounds, and she's done that while shooting 44.6% from the floor. So those are certainly, like, if she would be able to keep that up over a full season, those would certainly put her in the MVP conversation. This might be a little bit more of a hot streak because Cardoso is sidelined, but once Cardoso is back, I think that this will be a lot more of a complete team. And we'll talk about Rachel Banham a little bit later on, but she had a really good revenge game against the Lynx on Sunday, and I think that she's really starting to establish herself as a strong secondary option in the backcourt alongside Ariel Atkins. So I think that this game really, to me, just reiterated the point that there are no easy wins in the WNBA. Even when you're playing, like, I think we would all consider the Sun to be the worst team in the league this year. And Dallas probably isn't far behind. But even when you're playing those teams, they are competitive, and they aren't necessarily pushovers, at least most nights. So I think that the Sky being competitive will really make the rest of the season a lot more fun. And maybe they can push for like one of the lower playoff seeds as the season progresses if they can keep things turned around.
Yeah, absolutely. It all stems from Angel Reese. Like, she struggled at the beginning of the season, and now she's playing like she was last year. And when she's playing at that level, she just needs a couple of surrounding members to play up to that. And this is a playoff team for sure.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that Camila Cardoso is almost back from playing in AmeriCup. We did see several players return from overseas play this week, including Julie Allemand. She had limited upside earlier this season while appearing mainly off the bench, but she's taken on a starting role in each of her 2 appearances since returning, and she's averaged 7.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists in 34 minutes per game during that time. The Sparks also claimed Julie Van Loo off waivers recently after recently parting ways with Odyssey Sims and Shea Petty, but it seems as though Allemand will get the first looks in the backcourt alongside Kelsey Plum, and Allemand is rostered in less than 2% of ESPN leagues, so she certainly warrants consideration, and she should be out there basically everywhere. So if she can keep that role that Odyssey Sims and Shea Petty kind of shared earlier, I think that the sky's the limit for her as the season progresses.
Yep. The only concern here is the Julie Van Loo signing. Obviously, like you said, Sims, you can even throw Sarah Ashley Barker in there. Like, when she was in the starting lineup, there was some production there. Whoever gets that starting spot is going to have production. It is Julie right now. So yes, pick up Julie. Well, Allemand. There's two of them. And then Van Loo is, you just got to be cautious. Keep an eye on Van Loo's minutes. I love Van Loo as a player. She's a veteran. She's a dog. She's going to, make this team better. And it's just a matter of whether she gets that starting role and if it's at the detriment of Allemand or if they can both coexist. But I do expect Van Loo to carve out a pretty substantial role. Maybe not like a 30-plus minute role, but I think Van Loo is going to be playing at least 20 minutes for this team with their guard depth. I just want, before I get into too many waiver pickups, I just want to list off some players that, are rostered in under 50% of leagues. Obviously there's, WNBA fantasy is a growing industry. So there are a lot of leagues that are less active and there are a lot of leagues that are super active. So if these players are available, just go and pick them up right now. Temi Fagbenle, Anise Morrow, Lexi Hall, Leonie Phoebish. These are all starters. They're all going to play heavy minutes. Anise Morrow has been in and out of the starting lineup, but they're all playing heavy minutes right now. And they aren't, ceiling raisers, but they're floor raisers for sure. They're going to score consistent fantasy production. And, maybe if you're in a shallower league, you're just streaming these players. But if you're in an 8 to 10, 12 player league, these players should be rostered and be must starts when their teams are playing. But, trending back to more of our, our lower rostered players for waiver pickups, Janelle Salon. If you've been following the show, you know that I love her as a player. She's my top pickup this week. She's rostered in only 24% of leagues after, overseas obligations. She was dropped a lot. She was a great player, starting a lot before that happened. And I expect Salon to be a top scoring threat for Golden State during the stretch run. I've said this before, when these players come back, it might take some time for them to adjust. She played only 9 minutes in her first game, so that might have caused some players to maybe even drop her if they were waiting for her to come back. But before she left, she played at least 28 minutes in 6 of 8 appearances, averaging nearly 14 points, 8 boards, and 2 assists when she's reached that 28-minute plateau. Saturday's contest was her first game off the bench, which I don't expect to last. I think she'll get back in the starting lineup before too long. This is one of those, the trends will tell you, maybe stay away from her. Hasn't played in a while, a few minutes. Golden State's got a lot of reinforcements back now. They're at full strength. But the eye test tells you, be patient. Janelle Salon is a great player. She's one of the most skilled players on the Valkyrie. She's going to get her opportunity again. And you don't want to be late to that, right? You want to be early. And if you're going to be early, you got to go and pick her up now.
Yeah, I think Salon's usage really showed just how much teams differ in the way that they reincorporate players after Eurobasket. The Valkyries did have some flexibility because they were so successful while their players were overseas, but we'll talk about Louisa Geiselzoder a little bit later in the show. And she played 33 minutes in her first game back. Salon was a different story, but I think that we'll see her minutes pick back up, especially once some of the hot hands from the abs from like the shorthanded period cool down a little bit. I think that Salon is a perfect candidate to jump back into the lineup. And then Jeff Whiteley asks, beside Paige Beckers, who are the top 3 fantasy rookies? I think that the top 2 players outside of Beckers are like pretty clear cut between Sonia Citron and Kiki Iriafen. Both of them play for the Mystics, and they've been really strong to begin the season. The third slot can be a little bit dicey. I think one player who we've seen emerge really recently, who you just mentioned, is Anisa Morrow. She, I think, has a lot of upside. She had a really productive college career and dealt with a preseason injury that limited her playing time early in the regular season. But if she can be at full strength the rest of the way, I think that she has a chance to be a real difference maker for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, and obviously Dominique for this year, obviously if you're talking about a dynasty league, Dominique is, you could argue probably not over Paige, but over Sonia and Kiki. Definitely you could argue Dominique if you were talking about a dynasty league. Also talk about Janelle Salon. It's her first year in the WNBA, so she's technically a rookie, even though she wasn't part of this rookie, the draft class, right? But she's still a rookie. So this it just depends on what exactly you're going after. If you're talking about production this year, absolutely. Paige Becker, Sonia, Kiki are at the top. And then Morrow is probably number 4. And then you even got your next waiver pickup and another guard from Dallas that has been playing pretty well for the shorthanded wings. Obviously, when Arike and they get fully healthy, Paige missed time with a concussion too. Those rookies will probably take a hit. But yeah, I think Paige is obviously at the top of the class. If you're talking about this year's production, it's the rookies in Washington, and then Dominique is the wild card, right? Like we don't know what she could be. She could be, a 10-time All-Star, even if she only plays 10 minutes this season. But she could also, never fully reach her potential. So definitely Dominique is the wild card X factor of this rookie class for sure.
Yeah, great question. Thanks so much for asking it. As you alluded to, Aziaha James is my next pick. She's continued her dominant run recently, including 6 consecutive appearances with at least 20 ESPN fantasy points. Now, it's worth noting that Dejanay Carrington was sidelined in 5 of these matchups, but Carrington doesn't appear to be particularly close to returning, and James has been strong enough that she may even be able to maintain a decent fantasy floor when the Wings are closer to full health. At the very least, James is a must roster player for this week because the Wings enter this 3-game week without both Carrington and Arike Ogunbowale, so there should be plenty of opportunities for Aziaha James to continue her recent run.
Yep, absolutely, totally agree. Dallas, there's a lot of playing time to go around when they're shorthanded, and Carrington was struggling before this injury too. So even when she does come back, obviously Arike is going to come back and have her normal role. But if these rookies, if James continues to perform, I don't see why Carrington would, pass her on the depth chart, unless Carrington is playing at the height of her powers, which she wasn't before the injury.
Yeah, and even with Ogunbowale, I think heading into the season, I really expected this to be just a 2-horse backcourt between Ogunbowale and Paige Beckers. Paige Beckers has really performed well. Arike Ogunbowale has taken a little bit of a step back, and that's evidenced by the fact that I believe for the first time in her 10-year career, she isn't an all-star this year. She's certainly had some fantasy value for those who drafted her, but I don't think that she's nearly lived up to her ADP. And I think that there are definitely a lot more backcourt minutes to go around outside of those two than we initially thought heading into the season.
I think that's a very good point. And Arike is one of those players where she needs the ball in her hands a lot. So obviously Paige taking the brunt of the attention from the defense away from her is going to benefit, but I think Arike is still trying to figure out how to best utilize Paige in the backcourt with her. But that'll take some time. But like you said, there's no reason to play Arike 45 minutes like she used to in previous seasons, right? Where she took 30 shots and those things. So still got to get her to be more efficient, which will help her fantasy floor. But I think she's still like their second best player. Like when she comes, she's going to be a starter. But like you said, the more minutes available for sure. Mm-hmm. My next pick is a super safe option. Salon was my top option. This is my safe option, and I'm going to go with like a high risk option. JC Sheldon is one of the safest streaming options on the market. She's rostered in only 10% of leagues. She's scored double-digit fantasy points in 10 straight. Couple 20-plus point outings in there too. Doesn't have a super high ceiling, but when you can count on her to get you double-digit fantasy points if you need. And her ceiling is a little higher as long as Marina Mabry's out. We're not really sure when Mabry's going to be back. I don't think Sheldon, you're not going to pick her up this week and you're going to be like, I picked her up and she dominated and I won my week. That's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at, maybe you pick her up on a lighter slate and she gets you 15, gets you 18, 20 points. And that's the difference in a tight week at the end, because those extra games on the light slates mean all the difference. And JC is available and she'll give you double-digit points.
Absolutely. And especially early in the week, I think that she's a perfect streaming candidate because, like you said, she hasn't displayed a lot of upside this week. Recently, I'm sorry. So she hasn't had more than 26 ESPN fantasy points, but she also hasn't had below 10 over her last 10 appearances. So I think that her establishing a fantasy floor can be really useful for fantasy purposes because it's nice to know a lot of times what you're like approximately going to get heading into a given night. Late in the week, sometimes it can be good to get those upside plays, the players who might get you single-digit fantasy points and might get you 40. But I think JC Sheldon is one of those players. She's just been really reliable recently, and after some inconsistent stretches to start her career, it's been encouraging to see her establish more consistency and a good fantasy floor as well. We also slightly discussed Rachel Banham last week, but she deserves her own discussion this week, especially after she was lights out during Sunday's narrow loss to the Lynx. She's made at least 3 shots from beyond the arc in 3 consecutive appearances, and she's helped to provide a spark for a Chicago team that seemed to be floundering in the backcourt after Courtney Vandersloot got hurt. It was a little bit of a revenge game for her on Sunday because she used to play for the Lynx, but I think that even without that extra chip on her shoulder, she's shown enough to be on the fantasy radar recently. And she's another one of those players where she's rostered in single-digit percentages of leagues. So most leagues she's out there and certainly warrants consideration.
Yeah, I have no problems with this. Starting in the starting lineup, going to keep that role for the foreseeable future. Chicago did, make a lineup change, but it was Onyewu for Rebecca Allen recently. I think Rachel Banham's spot is pretty secure, especially if she keeps making these threes. Like I alluded to earlier, my long shot is Louisa Geiselsloder. She's rostered in only 5% of leagues, returned from Eurobasket recently and played 33 minutes right away. So we've been talking about teams, slowly integrating players back into the mix. She got the start, played heavy minutes right away. Maddie Siegrist is out. So they started Lee Ueru and Geiselsloder at the same time. For a team that didn't have a center at the beginning of the season, all of a sudden they have a bunch of centers. So it's kind of crowded here. But I think, Tierra McCowan came back too. But I think Geiselsloder is the best fit with this team when Paige and Enrique are healthy. And I think Ueru has earned a role and will play and maybe even stick in the starting lineup when Siegrist comes back, and they'll stick with this 2-center lineup. But I think Geiselsloder, given her the role she had and the playing time she had at the beginning of the season, it'll be her starting spot over Ueru until further notice.
Absolutely. And even though Geiselsloder played 33 minutes in her return to action, she scored just 17 ESPN fantasy points, which could give you an opportunity that if she's still out there, she maybe didn't wow enough to earn a roster spot, but she shot just 11.1% from the floor on Thursday. So that was her worst shooting performance of the season, and I think that she'll bounce back. She had 3 blocks, which is very impressive and really just shows her potential on the defensive end of the floor. She's had multiple blocks in 3 of her 8 performances this season. So I think that the Wings will probably prioritize Geiselsloder over Lee Ueru. But like you said, I think that there is an opportunity for both of them to really shine in the front court over the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Ueru, she deserves the spot, and they made a trade, right? This wasn't just a trade to fill time while we McCowan and Geiselsloder are out. This was we want to see your development, and it sucks for Ueru because she was in Seattle behind Nneka and Ezzy and a great front court, and now she's in a similar situation. But I think she'll keep playing. I think she'll play 20 minutes, and like you said, even when she plays those limited minutes, she can produce a double-double. She can produce solid numbers. So while Geiselsloder will have the minutes, I think both of these players can be fantasy relevant, and definitely both should be rostered in more than 5 and 8% of leagues.
For sure. And speaking of which, Ueru is my final waiver pickup of the week. Like you said, 8.1% of leagues rostered. That number should definitely grow. I was a little bit nervous about how her role would look once Geiselsloder did return to action, but Geiselsloder played 33 minutes against the Mercury. Ueru played 24 minutes, which is less than it, but it was still an increase over her 19 minutes that she had played in her previous game. And not only that, but Ueru posted a double-double, which was her second over 4 appearances since joining the starting lineup. Ueru has shown her talent in the past around the WNBA, and she just didn't really have much of a role in Seattle to begin the season, but she certainly seems to have found her footing in Dallas. And we've talked about Dallas is probably a bottom 2 team in the league. I don't think that will really change. And especially with Paige Beckers performing so well, it seems as though they'll probably shift their focus toward development over the latter half of the season. And Ueru, even though she's been in the league for a few years, she's still only 26 years old. So it wouldn't be surprising to see the Wings just explore what they have with her and give her a lot of minutes, even with Geiselzuter in action. And even if Ueru's upside is a little bit less than it maybe would be when Geiselzuter was out, I think Ueru definitely has the chance to put together those really strong performances for Dallas. And then heading into this week, looking ahead, I'm saying this as much for myself as I am for the viewers, but there are several games this week that start on weekday mornings. Basically every day after tonight, we have morning games on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So be sure to check your fantasy lineups either the night before or early in the morning to be sure that you aren't missing out on anyone. One camp game that should be especially exciting to watch is the Valkyries versus the Fever on Wednesday. It'd certainly be more exciting if Caitlin Clark is ultimately cleared to play, but we alluded to earlier, the Fever seem to be developing more of an identity without her. So I think that this will be an entertaining game to watch either way.
Yeah, Valkyries quickly becoming one of the most fun watches in all of the WNBA, that's for sure. I'm turning my attention to the Las Vegas Aces. Up until this moment, I've kind of been like, pause. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. But I'm officially putting the caution flag out. This is a make or break week for Las Vegas. They're currently at 500, which is crazy to say. They play the Liberty tomorrow, which should be fun. New York will probably be favored. After New York, Las Vegas faces Washington on Thursday and Golden State on Saturday. Aces should probably be favored in both of those games, and they'll need to win both, especially if they lose to New York. If they win all three next Monday, we'll be like, oh, Kirien, you waited, and then you got all worried about them, and then now they're fine. 12-9, and they're trending up. Big 3-game or 4-game winning streak, big win over the Liberty, blah blah blah. But if they go 1-2, if they go 0-3 this week, watch out, man. This is dangerous. The New York, get Phoebish back. They're one of the best teams in the league. That's going to be tough. Golden State, not an easy matchup. Dominating, consistently outperforming or outplaying teams. Maybe there's teams that have more talent. The Aces have more talent. I'll guarantee you Golden State will play harder in that game. Are the Aces going to have enough talent? Are they going to hit enough shots to win that game? A 1-2 week is not good enough this week for the Aces. And if they're 10-12 or 10-11 next time we're talking, it's going to be bad news.
Yeah, and the Aces' problem hasn't been their ability to blow up opponents, because they've done so on several occasions this season. It's just been their inconsistency, which I think is why they're 500. It's been one step forward, one step back for this team. They began this current road trip that they're on over the first 3 games, an 84-81 win over Phoenix, which is really encouraging because the Mercury are one of the better teams in the league. But then the next game was an 81-54 loss to the Fever in Indiana. They just got run off the floor there. And then they bounced back with an 18-point win over Connecticut, which wasn't very surprising. But they'll need to develop a lot more consistency down the stretch. I think that acquiring Nalissa Smith will probably be good for them in the short term. They did give up a first-round pick for her, so the value of that can be debated in the long run. But I think that Nalissa Smith should provide more upside than Kia Stokes has shown in the lineup. But whether Nalissa Smith is able to put her over the top, I think Nalissa Smith is a really talented player. She showed some promise during her time in Indiana, but I don't know if she's the catalyst that will be able to put all the pieces together. And I think that they could still struggle as the season rolls on.
And I totally agree with you, because Nalissa Smith is an inconsistent player. She's a very talented player, but she's an inconsistent player. And like you said, the Aces' main issue is inconsistency. So you have an inconsistent player. She had a good game and you guys win, right? You moved her into the starting lineup, but she's not going to fix your inconsistencies. She's probably just going to extrapolate those inconsistencies even more. Your ceiling's going to get higher and your floor might get lower. It's interesting. I think you also got to talk, if we're talking about going in depth on the Aces, we also got to talk about Jewell Loyd. 5 points over the last 2 games, like 1 for 13 or 14 from 3. You lose Kelsey Plum, you bring in Jewel Lloyd. That's supposed to be a 1-for-1 move, right? That hasn't been the case this season. And, it's tough she played with Brianna Stewart. She played with Sue Bird, I believe. She's used to playing with strong, capable players, but playing with Asia Wilson, playing with Chelsea Gray, playing with Jackie Young, that's a little bit different than just playing with Stewie, right? Playing with Sue Bird at the end of her career, being the 4th option on a team when you're a shooter and you're used to having the ball in your hands a lot is tough. But yeah, Jewel Lloyd is that player that needs to be more consistent. I think Melissa Smith is a nice add, good player, doesn't fix what they need. They need Jewel Lloyd to be a superstar if they're going to compete this year.
For sure. In a lot of these games, if Jewel Lloyd's shot was falling more, I think that we would be talking about the Aces as more of a 75% win percentage instead of 500. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Lloyd and the rest of the crew as the season rolls along. Another entertaining afternoon matchup will be on Wednesday as well with Minnesota versus Phoenix. The Lynx secured a 23-point win over the Mercury on June 3rd, but that was when Phoenix was without Kalia Copper. It's also possible that Phoenix is shorthanded Wednesday because the team is entering this week with Copper and Satu Sabally sidelined due to injuries. But if the Mercury are healthy, I think that this could be a really competitive game out west. If Sabally and or Copper are sidelined, I think that I would definitely give the advantage to the Lynx, but could be entertaining if both teams are basically full strength.
Yeah, I feel like I jinxed Phoenix last week. We talked about how they're fully healthy and finally ready to make their mark on this season, and now they have a injury report full of red question marks again. Hopefully that's just maintenance stuff. They're back, but just be cautious with their workloads and whatnot. But those red cues are always concerning, especially for a player like Satu Sabally, who it's been a history in her history.
Yeah, that seems to be how it goes. But both of them seem to be day-to-day for now, so yeah. I'm encouraged, but we'll see.
Yeah, I definitely think these are just, they've missed time already. They injury history in their past, so just give them some time. But yeah, it just felt like it's like that player that injures himself when they're having a career year, like Tyrese Halliburton. Like you're at the peak of your powers, and then all of a sudden everything comes crashing down. I don't think it's that bad yet, but there's going to be very few chances this season where I think all 3 of those players are fully healthy playing 35 plus minutes. And Phoenix wants that to be in the playoffs, not, on July 7th. So I think the red question marks, I feel like I psyched people out with that. I don't think you need to worry about it now. But it's definitely something to monitor for sure.
Right. And we have about a week and a half left until the All-Star break. So it makes sense that if the Mercury see an opportunity to rest some of their players before that break, it would behoove them to do it now. Satu Sabally was wearing a walking boot during practice the other day, so that was a little bit concerning. But Nate Tibbetts has downplayed the severity for now. So we'll take him at his word for the time being.
Yeah, that seems like something, this is just get her off her feet a little bit, to take the traction off, because once Satu Sabally is on the court, man, she rivals the best of the best. And so we all want her to play and watch her play for sure.
For sure. And that does it for today's show. We'll be back next Monday at 1 p.m. Central, so be sure to join us then. Thanks for watching.